just have a look at what is potting on, just to start with, and really to say that it's about replanting seedlings into a larger pot, which I think that most of you have kind of identified that that is in fact the case. Sorry, excuse my mouse moving around like a mad person. And if you're able to see my, there's a thumbnail of the other view. In fact, I'll just see if I can just spotlight that for a moment. Stop the share. Right, so here you can see that really what we're talking about, for example, is that this pot here, you can see has lots and lots of little plants in it. And so there were several seeds, quite a few seeds planted in this pot. And so what we're talking about is how do we then separate those out into separate plants, basically. Okay, so that's what we're talking about today. That's the potting on process. And when do you pot on? And why do you pot on? So basically what you're looking for is a situation where the seedlings have developed their first two true leaves. And again, I'm just going to show you this. So here, well, one or two, I suppose. So these are some pumpkins that I've grown. And what you'll notice with the pumpkins is that the first two leaves look really different to the subsequent leaves. So these are the first two leaves that actually grow out of the seed itself. And then what happens is the plant grows, it starts growing, it's what are called the true leaves. And these true leaves really indicate that the plant's getting going and starting to grow. So that you can see that there on the pumpkins. You can see it here on the cucumbers. These cucumbers have got slightly younger true leaves. You can see they're just starting to come out here. And then you'll also be able to see on some of these seedlings down here that, for example, you've got I've got some kale here that has the first two leaves, and then there's the first true leaf. Okay, so you want to wait until you've got to a point where that's pretty much, they've started growing beyond their first two seed leaves, if you like. And the point of potting on is to separate out the plants and put them into their own pots, so there's space for the roots to grow. So often potting on is really about separating several seedlings that have been planted together in a single pot and giving them each their own pot to grow in. And that means they'll have a much better chance of growing healthily and strongly. Now, part of the reason also for doing this is that you could say, well, for a lot of plants, you could plant them straight out in the soil. So, for example, you can see that I was showing you some chard, some kale, various different types of kale and some spinach that I've got. And all of those could be planted straight out into the soil. But the part of the reason why I've grown them here is because indoors, I suppose. I grew them indoors, first of all, because it's warmer, so they'll germinate more quickly. But I've also grown them indoors, and I still want to pot them on so that they are stronger plants and larger plants, so that they've got a better chance against slugs and other creatures that will want to eat them, basically. And they'll be stronger and more ready to deal with, being outside, basically. So that's the reason why you would, for some plants, you would plant them up inside and, grow the seeds that way. So in terms of what you have to consider when potting on, you need to think about what kind of compost are you going to use, what size pot to use, how to inoculate the soil with the necessary fungi and bacteria, and of course, how to move the plant without killing it. The last is probably the main thing that most people sort of worry about, and with good reason, frankly, because they're quite fiddly sometimes. But we'll get to that at any rate. So the first thing is what kind of compost, and the important thing to understand if you were able to come to our seed growing workshop is that seed compost has very low fertility, and that's because the seed contains within itself a whole load of food for the plant to be able to germinate and grow the first two first two leaves and the roots. The idea is that therefore you don't want to be you don't want to give the seeds very highly fertile soil, because then they'll just bolt. You know, they'll start growing really fast and become very long and leggy, which you don't want. So generally speaking, seed compost has low fertility, and when you pot them on, the plants are at the stage where they want to really get going. You know, they need some food, they need to get to grow more vigorously, and so that by that point you want some regular compost, or you can use John Innes #2. I mean, that's a kind of way of defining compost where you've got a compost which has more fertility than, say, seed compost, and so suitable for seedlings that are kind of potting on, basically. And so basically the idea is that that's what you're going to use, and the plant needs more fertility to develop healthily. So that's your starting point, is you're going to need some compost. That's a regular compost is fine. You don't have to be, most plants aren't that fussy. So that should be fine. So what size pot? Well, the size of pot, I would say, will depend on three things. So first of all, the eventual size of the plant. So for example, with the pumpkins, they are going to be huge, and I can't plant them out. How quickly you want to plant it in the soil. I wouldn't plant out pumpkins or courgettes or cucumbers for another week or two, I would say, until the cold weather has definitely passed. So that's what you are going to need to consider. So in other words, for pumpkins and even and courgettes and cucumbers, I would pot them on into larger pots, because I want them to grow quite substantially before I plant them out into the actual garden, if that makes sense. Whereas things like calendula, which I have here, marigold, English marigold, they don't need to be planted into, you know, particularly big pots. They'll be fine in fairly small pots before I plant those out. And to be honest, the same is the case with the kale as well, because that is not restricted. You know, that'll be fine. I can plant that out whenever they've grown sufficiently to be happy outside and ready to take on the rigors of all the things that will probably want to eat them. So it also depends on how much space you have. So this is the point when you get to potting on, where generally what people find is that they're going to need about 5 times as much space as they've had for their seedlings and seeds. Because what happens is that you get to this point and you grossly overestimate how many plants you're actually going to need to grow to begin with. So what's probably happened, for example, I have somehow managed to grow 20 pumpkins. I've got no idea how, but I've now counted them up and realized that they have all germinated very successfully. And I now have about 20 pumpkins, which probably would correspond to about half an acre of, you know, space, which I definitely don't have. So, yeah, so hopefully this will happen to all of you, and you will realize that you can bring plants up to the community garden and put them there, because luckily there is lots of space there. But nonetheless, the issue is, where are you going to put them after you've potted them on, before they're ready to go out? So this is where you'll probably have some restrictions. I know I've certainly already used up all my windowsill spaces, and I'm going to have to be creative, shall we say, about where else all the potted on plants are going to be. So you have to bear that in mind, I would say. And now this is something which you probably won't have heard of or considered, it, unsurprisingly, how to inoculate the compost with the necessary fungi and bacteria. So in my view, this is really important, makes a big difference to how your plants go on to develop. And that's because the compost that you've bought, if you buy compost in a bag, it's always been sterilized. And what that means is that all the fungi and bacteria inside the bag, inside the compost, has been killed. So there's no bacteria or fungi to support the plant. Now, the reason why this is important is because the plants form a symbiotic relationship with bacteria and fungi. The bacteria and fungi live around the roots of the plant, and the plant feeds them sugars that they create through photosynthesis. And scientists reckon now that about 30 to 70% of the sugars that plants generate through photosynthesis are actually fed to the bacteria and fungi that live around their roots. So in other words, they support an entire ecosystem in the soil by feeding them those sugars. And what happens is the bacteria and fungi play a crucial role for the plant because they transform the minerals in the soil into a form that the plants can eat. And so they feed them back with the minerals that they need in order to grow. So in other words, without the bacteria and fungi, the plants are really a bit up the creek. And so it's quite important to understand that it's a bit of a problem that the compost that you're using generally has been sterilized, which means there are no bacteria and fungi in there to support the plant. Now, I'm not saying that the plants won't grow by themselves. They will. You know, there are bacteria everywhere. So, of course, even though the compost has been sterilized, that doesn't mean that there won't be bacteria in the soil, in the compost. It's also the case that there are fungal spores everywhere as well. So they will, in time, you know, find their way to the roots of your plants and start growing. It's more that if you inoculate your seedlings with the bacteria and fungi to start with, it just gives them a really big boost. And what's interesting is that the company that I use to buy inoculant from, as it's called, is a company called Symbio. And interestingly enough, they started life providing bacteria and fungal inoculant to competition vegetable growers, because they realized, these competition vegetable growers, you know, those crazy people, which I hope there aren't any here tonight, but insofar as I'm going to be rude about them, but they're the crazy people that want to grow, you know, 5-foot long carrots and you know, the biggest pumpkin that's going to squash you if it accidentally falls on you and things like that. Which I can kind of imagine. I can't really imagine getting into it myself, actually, but I can get the kind of thrill of growing something very large. I guess I could say that. But anyway, these people worked out that if they inoculated their plants with bacteria and fungi, that gave their plants a huge boost. And so they were the main customers, actually, for Symbio in their early days. And now the knowledge and understanding that, in fact, plants need bacteria and fungi in order to grow well has spread. And many more people now appreciate that and understand that. And, you know, you'll see Monty Don on Gardener's World talking about adding mycorrhizal fungi to the root ball of a rose and, you know, so on. So it is much more accepted. And I would say it's really beneficial when you're potting your plants on. And the other thing that today what we're going to use is something called Symbio Ecto Whip Dip, which I just love the name of it, as some people will already know. I'm going to show you what that is, and I'll also show you the packet and so on. So hopefully that will help if you want to use something similar. The other thing you can also do as well, which I've also found makes a massive difference, is that you can, because when you're moving the plants, you're essentially shocking them. I mean, it's no different to, you know, everyone says that when you move, it's one of the most stressful things you can do for us. So you can imagine what it's like for plants, where you're essentially pulling parts of them off, because that will inevitably happen, that's going to be the case, because you can't do it, really. It's very hard to do without that happening. So that's worth kind of bearing in mind, that one of the things that you can do is to dip them into a seaweed solution, dip the roots, that is. And what I found is that really helps. The seaweed is a really good food for bacteria and fungi. And that's also something that's worth bearing in mind. I mean, we're going to be adding seaweed food as a food to the plants in the community garden. It's like a seaweed sort of reduced concentrate, but it's fantastic for plants. And it's partly fantastic for plants because it's a fantastic food for the fungi. And the fungi are really, one of the crucial feeders of the plants. So you can also do that, which I'm going to show you. So now we get to the point where we say, well, if you're potting on, how do you move the plant without killing it? Well, you will kill some, and just bear in mind that, depending on what they are, who they are, you can either eat them if they're dead, if you've managed to kill them, or they will compost down and, benefit the compost. So you have to bear in mind and have to live with the fact that you're not going to manage. Well, I'm saying that sounds, you aren't necessarily going to kill them all. The likelihood is, in my view, that you will. But one of the most important things to understand is never to hold the plant by the stem. So if you break the stem, which is very easy to do, then the plant is dead. The plant's not going to regrow if you've broken the stem. So what you need to do is hold the plant by one of the leaves, because a plant can lose a leaf and still survive. Okay, so as you're lifting the plant out of the soil, it's a good idea, just make sure you hold the leaf. Don't be tempted to hold the stem. Of course, it's a case of don't do as I do, but do as I say, because I have been known to be convinced that I can manage to hold the stem and not kill it, but that actually doesn't always happen. So that's all my blurbing that I've got to do. Except for labels. Okay, so what tends to happen to me is I am nowhere near anal enough about how I approach life in general and potting on in particular. So what tends to happen is I'm convinced that I'm going to remember who the plants are and that I really don't need to put labels in. But what you've got to bear in mind is that cucumbers and pumpkins and courgettes and squash, they all look really, really similar. So I would really advise you to put labels in, and the same is probably true of a whole heap of other plants as well, that by the time you've potted them on, you can't quite remember which is which. And in the case of courgettes and pumpkins and cucumbers, then that gives you a bit of an issue, because obviously cucumbers will grow up as small trellis or small wigwam, whereas pumpkins, if you put them in imagining they're going to grow to the, the small size that cucumbers grow to, you're going to be very mistaken and suddenly discover that you've got a giant monster on your hands. And cucumbers and courgettes, of course, grow completely differently as well. So I would recommend, in general, remembering to put labels on. So that's where I've got to. I'm going to ask for any questions that people have kind of immediately, I suppose, bearing in mind that obviously I haven't shown you actually how to do it. So I'm not imagining that you'll know anything about that. But if anybody's got any questions, immediate questions on what I've said here, then ask them. Otherwise, just hold fire, make a note of them, and then ask me after I've done the sort of practical section. So if you do have a question, just remember to unmute yourself. I think you might also find that you can put a hand up or something as well. I think that means no. So I am now going to move to camera 2. Right, so here we are at the potting on station. Oops. And yes, I've got quite a lot of plants here, as you can see. So what I'm going to start by doing, move this out of the way. So I'm just going to start by filling this pot. I'm going to pot on some calendula to begin with. So I am just going to fill this pot up with compost. This is just a nice free draining compost. Okay. And this is really the crucial point, is how to get these calendula plants out of this pot and separate them out. So what I'm going to start by doing, and this is always tricky, is to loosen up the pot. So I'm just squeezing the pot around the outside, and then I'm just going to tap it on the bottom. And that's to loosen up, I'm hoping, the pot so that I can shake out everything from inside. So there we go. So I've now got all the plants out. And what you can see, I hope, is that they've basically formed one entire root ball. I'm just going to pluck the label out of there. So what it means is the roots are all mixed up, okay? And that's what then gives you the heebie-jeebies, because then you wonder how on earth you're going to separate out the individual plants without destroying some of the roots. And the answer is that you are going to have to break some of the roots, but the roots can regrow. Okay, so what I'm going to do is basically to take this and start to pull it apart. And I'm pulling the roots apart, but that's fine. I'm not too worried about that. I may, in the process, lose some plants. So I've just separated that out in half. And now I can start to see the individual plants. So you can see here's an individual plant. And I'm just going to tease that out. And you can see I'm holding this by the stem. This stem is fairly tough, but what I should be doing is holding this by the leaf. Okay, so I'm just holding this by the leaf. And hopefully what you can see is there's the root system and there's the leaf and the rest of the plant. And I'm going to put it into this pot here. So what it means is I'm actually going to take, I always do this, I fill up the pot and then end up taking most of the compost out of the pot again, because I realize that actually that's not going to work. Just pop this down here for a moment, because I'm now going to move to the Ecto Whip Dip. So this is the Ecto Whip Dip, which basically consists of plant gels. So it's like a kind of jelly type stuff, which I'm hoping you can see there. And to that, so I've just taken the jelly crystals and added water. And what I'm going to do now is to add some mycorrhizal fungi, which is in this container here. So this is the product that I'm using, called Symbiome Mycoforce Ecto Whip Dip. I mean, it sounds like it comes from outer space. Sounds like George brought it with him today. And so I'm just going to take, this is the powder, which contains the fungal spores and the bacteria. I'm just taking some of that out, and I'm just going to mix it in with the gel. This is quite fun. I like this bit. And you can see it creates this, it all gets mixed in quite effectively. It's like cooking. And then what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of this. So the key thing that you need to make sure is that this is going to attach to the roots of the plant. So what I'm going to do is, having created the hole in the compost, I'm just going to put a bit down at the bottom. And then what I've also got here, this is deluxe potting on, I would say. So I'm bringing over my seaweed. I'm just going to pick this calendula plant up by its leaves. I'm just going to dip the roots into the seaweed, like so. And into the pot they can go. And then what I'm going to do is just hold it in place while I add the compost around. There we go. That's just firmed in nicely. And that's that plant potted on. So I'll just do another one just so that you can see another one. So I basically add a little bit of compost at the bottom, and then a little bit more, a little bit of Ecto Whip Dip go in. And this is the point where most people get nervous, is this is the rest of this little clump of calendula. And so what I'm going to do is just gently with my fingers, just tease these apart. So I'm just easing them to separate them. And that I can feel some of them are tearing, you know, some of the roots are tearing and some of them are, you know, so some of the plants will end up, I think, with fewer roots than others. And so you can see this has got an excellent root system, this one, which is somewhat by chance, but we'll dip that in the seaweed and pop that in here. Pop a bit more, I'm going to give that one a bit more ecto whip dip. There we go. And then in we go with some compost around the outside. And I'm just firming that down. So that's that. So then I just carry on with the rest of the plants. And what you'll notice is that this is what I was talking about the fact that you'll go from having one pot to having, if I separate all these out, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there are 9 plants here that I would then have to pot on. So I'd go from having 1 pot to having 9 pots. So you can start to see how everything sort of escalates, shall we say. So that's the calendula. Next, what I'm going to do are these lovely pumpkins. This is a variety called potimarron, which strangely enough has a French name, but the variety actually comes from Japan. Well, actually originally comes from the Americas, because all the pumpkins come from America, but this one has come from America, to us from America via Japan, which is kind of strange. I mean, it's an interesting history. So again, you can see I'm just squeezing this, and I've put my finger, can you see, so that I'm ready to support the pot. So in other words, I've just put my finger in between the 2 plants so that I can hold this, and then I'm going to take this out. And you can see this is actually really dry, which is not good. I'd prefer to have made sure that this was wetter before I started. But what I'm going to make sure is that once I've potted these on, that I make them really nice and wet. Okay, so once again, you can see that I've got a good root system for both plants. And so what I'm going to do is just ease them apart. There we go. So I've now separated out the plants, which I'm hoping you can see well. And this one's now ready to go in here. Now this stem is incredibly, well, it's very delicate, let's put it that way. So I'm going to add pop in some ecto whip dip, plonk this into my seaweed, give that a bit of a seaweed feed, which this will love because it's a bit dry as well. And then pop that in here. And there we go, I've got hold of the leaf, actually remembering to hold the leaf and not the stem. And then I can put the compost all the way around. Now, one of the things that you can also do with these plants, it's not the case with all of them, but tomatoes, the pumpkins, they're all quite happy for you to sort of put more compost around the stem. So in other words, I've put more where the stem originally met the soil. So what we're talking about here is this point, which you can see there. I've actually probably put the soil up to about there when I've potted it on, and they're quite happy with that. They'll just grow some more roots. With some plants, they're not happy. They will in fact rot. So before I do anything else, I'm going to grab my pumpkin label. This is the point at which I would otherwise have no idea whether or not this was a butternut squash or a courgette or anything else. So that's now potted on and just needs some water. And I'm just going to just quickly do this other pumpkin before it suffers from being here, one of my many pumpkins, as I've said. Oh, there's a bit of that. Again, I'm lifting this up by the root system and holding a leaf, dunking into the seaweed, popping in the pot, holding by the leaf, and then just putting the compost around the outside. There we go. Right, that's good. They're ready. Those over there. The other thing I just wanted to show you is how to deal with these kinds of little modules, because they can be a bit awkward to try and get the plants out. So I thought I'd just show you some of these as well. So I'm going to lift this up. So this one here is a red winter kale. And what you'll notice is that you can kind of get underneath. The idea is to get underneath and push the bottom of the module up, which I'm hoping you might be able to see just here. I'll just move that out of the way. So here I'm just going to push this up. And you can see that this is sort of coming out. It's a bit like squeezing something out of a toothpaste tube or something like that. But it's at this point that it's quite tricky to get your fingers in and get as much of that module out as possible. And I don't always succeed. I mean, I've not done too bad a job there. There we go. So what I'm hoping you can see here is that I've got 3 little kale plants out of that module. Just going to pop the module back down here now. So these are now ready to be potted on. And you can see again, they've obviously all got a root system that's kind of mixed up together. So I'm just going to tease them out. So there's one plant here, which has only got its first 2 leaves. But there's that. And then I've got these plants here, which have their first 2 true leaves, or first true leaf there. Okay, so I've just, again, teased these apart. What I'm hoping is you can see the roots and then the little plants. Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to pop them down there and get another pot, pop a bit of compost in, bit of Ecto Whip Dip. And one of the other things that you can do with these, where you've got very, very small plants like this, is actually to create your pot and then just tease open a hole. And what some people do, especially with little seedlings like these, is to do that and then to use a pencil. You often see people using a pencil. So can you see I've got this poor plant by its leaf. I'm going to dip into the seaweed. Oops, come on. There we go. And hopefully you can see this, my hole has disappeared, but let's just pop that in there. There you go. There we go. And then I can just pop the rest of the compost around that. And just firm that in gently. And that's then ready to go. So that will now have a chance to grow on and become a more substantial plant. So that I'm hoping has shown you, so you can get the idea of how to go about this.
Susanna,
yeah,
there are a number of questions that have come up.
Good.
So Yogi's asked, if you forget to do the whip dip at that stage, could you add it later?
Yes, you could absolutely add it later. So I'm adding whip dip at this stage. I would probably also add it when I plant them out. So yes, if you've got plants that you want to pot on now and you're not going to wait for Ecto Whip Dip, or you don't want to buy Ecto Whip Dip, because it's an expense, then yes, don't worry about it.
I've sent the link to the Symbio Whip Dip, but I think sometimes you can see mycorrhizal fungi in garden centres if they ever open again. So I think other places other than Symbio sell it, don't they?
Yes, they do. And it's called, there's a product also called Root Grow, actually.
Yeah, I think
And
that's what.
also,
Yeah.
that's a
But
mycorrhizal fungi.
I think people were saying, could you show the packet so that they can take a photo?
Take down the details.
Yeah, or just take a picture of it if it's possible.
Is that working, or is it back to front? That's back
It's
to
fine.
front.
That works really well.
Oh, it does. Okay, good.
Yeah, that's okay for people. And then there were lots of questions about the compost, because is normal compost, normal compost you buy in wherever, okay for this?
Yes.
Good. And the last question was about seaweed, and could you possibly use seaweed from the beach?
No. So seaweed from the beach is going to have a lot of salt in it. So I think what's happened with this, to make this seaweed liquid, is that they've probably washed the seaweed quite a lot, and then I'm not quite sure how they make it, but you can get it from Garden Organic, which is called the organic catalogue. It's organiccatalogue.com. And if you're growing stuff, it's a fantastic feed. Fantastic feed. The plants really love the feed and love that as a feed. And that's mainly because it's feeding the mycorrhizal fungi around the base. So it is a fantastic product, I would say. So yeah.
I will add that link into the chat so that people can see that as well.
It looks like Kieran's got a question.
Oh, yes. Kieran says, I don't have a greenhouse. Should I plant my plants inside because of the cold?
It depends who they are. So your tomatoes, peppers, courgettes, cucumbers, pumpkins, beans, sweet corn, you probably could put them out now, but it's still a little bit early. And the other thing that you're going to want to do, which I haven't included in my presentation, but is something that's important to bear in mind, is to do what they call hardening off. And hardening off is basically where you acclimatize your plants to the fact that they're going to be moving from your nice warm windowsill or greenhouse into the outdoor world, which of course in Britain is kind of variable. So what you do is you take your plants and you put them outside, generally by your back door or somewhere quite close to your greenhouse or something like that. Put them out in the morning and bring them in the evening. And you do that for about a week. And that way they kind of just get used to the fact that there is an outdoor world and they're going to have to adjust to that. And in fact, it's also quite useful, because if you do have a problem with slugs, it tends to harden the plants up a bit. So when they're indoors, they're very kind of sappy and, sort of quite delicate and really, really tasty for slugs. And so by hardening them off, you kind of you harden them up. I mean, they do literally get harder, and so that can really help with it can help with slugs, but it also just means they're acclimatized to going out.
Okay. Then there's another question about this session. Is it being recorded? Can people in the recording access it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll send it around after.
Yes, I hope so. We haven't done the recording yet, so I'm not sure whether or not it's just going to create a giant file, but we will try that.
Oh, now this is another question from Kieran. Kieran's obviously a very keen gardener. Should I use slug pellets?
No, definitely don't use slug pellets. So slug pellets are made with metaldehyde generally, and that is extremely poisonous to humans and to wildlife. And what happens is people use slug pellets, and that's why one of the reasons why there are no thrush around. So thrushes, the bird, they eat a lot of slugs, and if you use slug pellets, that'll kill them as well as hedgehogs and frogs, and any other creatures that eat slugs. So don't use those slug pellets. You can, I think, get some organic slug pellets, but I am going to try a new system this year, which is to plant some plants for the slugs. So I'll probably put in some lettuce that they tend to love. I have had 60 lettuces eaten all in one night before, so I know they really like lettuces. So I'm going to plant some lettuces for them, and then I'm going to use, someone had the idea of using Velcro, Um, but I'm talking about the hooks. Yeah, not the loops, the hook bit of the Velcro. So I'm going to try that as a slug barrier. Yeah,
I've been trying wool. You can
yeah, I've
get,
tried wool.
yeah, but that didn't work. So
No.
with the dog food we get, you get wool sheets.
Oh, do you? Oh,
That
right.
as a deterrent under some wood bark.
Right.
See if that works. Worth a
Yeah,
try.
well, it'd be interesting to hear what people find. I mean, you've got to bear in mind there do need to be some slugs out and about. Unfortunately, on my allotment, people around me do use slug pellets, and so all the slugs obviously know this and gravitate onto my plot.
Oh, so yeah, Monica suggested eggshells around the plants.
Yeah, that's cool.
And Jude has suggested make your own garlic spray.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and also suggesting nematodes.
Yep.
So lots of things. And then Jude was saying if you look up ideas online, you can find lots of different deterrents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's worth a try. Kieran's also asked, should I put food in the water or not? I guess that's when you're watering the plants when you potted them on.
You can do so. Putting in seaweed into the water would, and basically then what you could do is do a kind of spray onto the leaves, and that is a foliar feed, they call it. So it's foliar because it goes onto the foliage. So you spray it onto the leaves. That could be really beneficial as well. I mean, that's beneficial at any time, to be honest, with plants. Really useful.
And Nero said, I've planted 10 seeds in a biodegradable pot, then moved the whole lot together into a bigger pot. Is this wrong?
No, that sounds fine. I mean, I think which seeds are they? Do we know? Do you know?
Nero, you can speak. It doesn't have to be me.
Yes, they're pepper seeds.
Pepper seeds. Okay, so they'll need to be separated out. When did you plant them into a bigger pot?
About 4 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
How do I turn this around?
Oh, there they are. Hold on. Let me just spotlight your screen. Okay, we're ready to see them.
Yeah. So these are the mini peppers.
Oh, I see.
Oh.
Great. So I'd give them a really good watering and then pot them on.
And these are the cayenne ones.
Brilliant. Same thing.
Yeah. And
They're looking really good.
Yeah, so I was scared of splitting. I squashed a few anyway while I was doing it.
Yeah, well, you probably will. I mean, I did quite well for me. Just bear that in mind.
Yeah.
I do usually squash some. I mean, I've potted on some courgettes the other week. I bent the stem of one. It's like it can happen at any time because once you've potted them on, then you've got these, the pumpkins are quite big. Their stems are really, sappy and easy to break. So you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not wanting to be to say that it'll definitely happen, but it is easy for it to happen. Did George have a question?
It looks like it.
Yes, I did. Thanks, Susanna. I mean, that's been fantastic. I've never heard of this Symbio Ecto Whip, and I'm going to go and get some of that. I've got two very quick questions. Could we use nettles in water instead of seaweed?
They're not the same thing, actually, but so the nettles, you can make a nettle tea from them, and that's the next workshop, actually, is going to be about tea, interestingly enough. Okay. Nettle tea would be great for the plants at a slightly later stage. I'd probably use it once you've planted them out, to be honest. Okay. So the seaweed's very specific to the shock of moving the plants.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the other question was, we tended to use seed trays, so now we've got to start putting them into pots. So after we've emptied one seed tray, can we use that compost again?
You probably could, yeah. Okay. I mean, what's left of it, yeah, that should be fine to reuse.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. It's been brilliant. Really learned a lot.
Good. Oh, well, I'm glad.
Kieran had one more question, which was, again, I think Kieran's got a big problem with slugs. Are there any plants you can plant kind of ward slugs off?
Not in my experience, no. I don't know. I mean, from a kind of a certain perspective, there are a lot of creatures that, you know, you could say I do battle with in the garden, which some creatures which I, you know, have a kind of, you know, my dad was in the army. I have a kind of seek and destroy kind of attitude towards somewhere. But I'm also understand that they are part of an ecosystem, you know, and I mean, if I just kill all the slugs, then I'm going to be killing off the food for a whole heap of other creatures. So I kind of bear that in mind. My experience is I found it, you know, last year I think I lost all my beans pretty much. Certainly lost a lot of squash and cucumbers. And so this year what I'm going to try is I'm going to make Velcro rings. We'll see how that works. So I have tried coffee grounds, spent hops, wool pellets, which actually are effective for a few days. Beer traps, which I think are one of the things I found most effective, just to reduce the number of slugs that are eating everything. But there are most things. My theory is that when you put down a deterrent, a barrier, what happens is they have a quite a sort of a very effective arrangement where one slug will go across and they'll gradually build up the slime on the barrier. So the wool pellets work for me for about 2 days, and then I think the slugs have built up sufficient slime on them that they no longer feel irritated by the wool because their slime is so effective. So, I mean, the other thing you can also do is go out late at night and collect them. That's very effective, and put them in a bucket. But you have to take them more than a mile away because they like to go home, which is not very fair on them, just taking them off to a whole other, you know, venue, if you like, home, place to live. So it's forced emigration. But that is also something that you can do if you find that you're being a bit overwhelmed by slugs.
I think Jude has suggested to Kieran to build a frog pond.
Yes,
it's a
that
great
would be
idea.
a much better idea. Definitely, you do.
Yeah, and much more fun.
You've probably not got too many slugs, but a deficit of frogs, and not enough thrushes. So try that.
Kieran's asked about wild garlic and how to grow wild garlic.
How do you grow wild garlic? Just put it in the ground.
It's not the same as normal garlic.
Yeah, no, it isn't. So we've got some wild garlic up in the garden. They're just bulbs that you buy. You can buy some from Herbal Haven. Absolutely delicious and very easy to grow under a tree, actually, and that should just spread over the years by itself. So you don't really plant from seed. You get little bulbs. And
send the link to.
Yeah, great.
Kieran. Oh, my machine's not working.
Good. Any other final questions? I'm just aware that we're coming up to the end of the session. Who's that? Someone's probably just muted themselves again.
Oh, is it me?
I can't see. Who is it? Oh, Jude, is that you?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Because Kieran was asking about slugs and they're the bane of my life. That's not why I built a frog pond, but when I was researching it, and actually it was quite straightforward to do. So I was just going to show Kieran what it looks like. Is that okay?
I think we're going to have to stop for the NHS.
Oh yeah.
NHS. So okay. I think what would be fantastic is to do a session on ponds, actually, and if you'd be all right to join that would be fantastic to see your pond. Then that would be really brilliant. And I think
it's great though.
Yeah, it looks absolutely lovely. So I'm sorry to have to cut you off because it'd be really good to hear that. I'm just aware of the time. Yeah, I know. I didn't. I was actually thinking this was going to be quite a short session. You know, because I haven't got lots of kind of major things. By the way, I mean, I will say just before we finish, you don't have to have ecto whip dip or seaweed. You know, that's the kind of deluxe version of potting on. Okay, so if you don't have those things, don't kind of think, oh, that's it, you know, I'm done for, my plants will never survive, they'll be fine. So yeah, and so I would also say that it would be brilliant if anybody has got extra plants, if you're going to take them to the community garden, which would be, at the moment there's a lot of space in the community garden, and the soil would be better to have plants in because of the this whole situation. We were planning that they should have plants in by now, but of course we can't have any permablitzes or gatherings. But if you do take plants up there, the main thing that you'll need to do afterwards subsequently is just keep them watered. But it'd be brilliant to, you know, to have whatever plants you've got. I think I should be bringing up some pumpkins by the sounds of it. Somewhere to put them. So I think that Joe and Hilary and Iris and Rish will send out feedback forms. Yep. After this, it'd be really great to have your feedback, because we are then feeding that back, if you like, to the funders, okay, who are funding the whole project. So we'd really appreciate your feedback, would be fantastic. And we've got another workshop coming up, I think on Tuesday, the 26th of May.
Yay!
But we'll send out details anyway for that. Okay, and yeah, in the meantime, good luck with your potting on, and it's really nice to see everyone. So
thank you
so
so
very
much,
everyone.
Thank you, Dan. It was
that was
wonderful.
brilliant.
Bye.
Good.
Bye, everybody.
See you.
Bye. Thank you.
Back for the NHS.
Yes,
Yep.
out for the clap for the NHS, exactly.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.
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 Was that okay, Hilary?
Yes, that was really good.
Good.
But you definitely do need someone moderating.
Yeah, I mean, thank goodness you were able to do all that with the questions. That was brilliant.
Yeah, because I could see them popping up. It's even things like just sticking links in.
Yeah, that was really good. I mean, I think that made a big difference.
Yeah.
And I think it meant we managed to get all the questions.
Yes, I think so. I'd answered some anyway, but then reinforced it with the question to you. But I think there wasn't anything that wasn't covered.
Yeah.
I think, and Kieran, I think is a very young gentleman, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the scout.
So he's really good, because he was asking lots and lots and lots. He was really engaged.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. It's really good. It
So
does imply they might be interested in having a short potting on workshop. I don't think
it makes total sense, though, doesn't it? Because they've done seeds, and did you see the photos that were sent?
Yeah,
they were so amazing.
I know, they were fantastic.
Yeah, they're such
really
a great
good
group.
That's really fantastic. So
yeah,
it might make sense to do that, like in a couple of weeks from now, when they've had 3 weeks. So then the seeds should have come up.
Yeah, and I mean, if we get Gillian now, I'm sure she'll kind of book it.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
And I think what was really nice is how many new people are on this one.
I know, it was good, wasn't it?
Yeah,
really good.
Well, unfortunately, it's very timely.
It's very what?
Timely.